You know that feeling when you're watching like a classic heist movie and the crew has executed the plan flawlessly?
Oh, absolutely. The part where everything just clicks.
Right. They bypassed the security grids, they blew the safe, they're standing in the vault looking at the gold, and everything has gone exactly according to the blueprint. But then, right at the moment of triumph, you hear the click of a gun hammer.
Oh, the worst feeling.
Yeah. You turn around, and the inside man, the guy who helped you draw up the plans, the guy you trusted to watch the door, is suddenly pointing his weapon at you. He locks you in the vault, triggers the alarm, and just walks away.
It's a total rug pull.
Exactly. And the shock isn't just that you lost the gold. It's that sudden, terrifying realization that the rules of the game you thought you were playing just fundamentally changed without your permission.
That narrative twist is so devastating because it forces the protagonist into immediate, brutal improvisation. I mean, all their previous theories about how the world works are just instantly obsolete.
The blueprint is completely useless.
Exactly. The blueprint is garbage now. The protagonist has to analyze a completely new, highly hostile reality in real time if they want to survive.
And that real-time survival and theoretical improvisation is exactly what we're exploring today. So welcome to our deep dive.
Glad to be here. This is a really fascinating one.
It really is. Today, our mission is to open up Volume 8 of the collected works of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And, we aren't looking at some broad, sweeping biography today. We're looking at an incredibly narrow, volatile window of time.
Very narrow. We're talking November 8th, 1848 to March 5, 1849.
Right. And to give you, the listeners, some context here, 1848 is known to historians as the Spring of Nations. It was this year of just cascading revolutions. You had barricades in Paris, uprisings in Vienna, Berlin, Italy, Hungary.
The old feudal monarchies that had choked Europe for centuries were suddenly just entirely on the ropes.
The vault was open.
Sure.
It seemed like democratic rights and constitutions were entirely within reach, right?
Yeah, I mean, the initial months of 1848 really did feel like this unstoppable democratic wave. But, and this is crucial, Volume 8 captures the immediate aftermath of that euphoria.
The hangover.
Exactly. This is the dark, freezing winter that followed the Spring of Nations. It's the phase where the old monarchies, the aristocratic circles, the conservative military forces, they finally caught their breath.
They realized they hadn't actually lost yet.
Right. They realized they hadn't been defeated at all. They had merely been caught off guard. So they regrouped and launched these massive coordinated counterattacks against all those democratic gains from the spring.
Now, before we go any further, I want to make our mission for this deep dive crystal clear. Our exploration of these texts is completely impartial.
Yes, 100%.
We are diving into Volume 8 purely as a collection of historical and philosophical documents. We're attempting to understand the original ideas Marx and Engels were wrestling with and, how they reacted to the shifting ground beneath their feet.
Right. We're looking at the mechanics of their thought process.
Exactly. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing the political viewpoints within these pages, nor are we condemning them. Think of us as structural engineers analyzing the blueprints of a bridge that underwent immense stress.
I like that analogy.
We just want to understand the load-bearing walls, the theoretical stress points, and why the structure ultimately shifted.
And the stress on the political actors of 1848 was absolute. I mean, to understand the opening of Volume 8, we have to look at the immediate catalyst for this reactionary winter.
Where did the tide actually turn?
It truly began in June 1848 with the defeat of the Paris proletariat. So the working classes in Paris had essentially acted as the muscle for the initial February Revolution, the one that overthrew the monarchy.
They were the ones manning the barricades.
Exactly. But by June, the newly established moderate bourgeois republic looked at the situation and decided that the workers' demands, for social protections and guaranteed employment were just too radical.
So the middle-class Republicans turned on the working-class revolutionaries.
They did. The government brought in the military under General Cavaignac and just crushed the workers' uprising with overwhelming artillery force right there in the streets of Paris. Thousands died.
Wow. So that defeat in Paris, that really acted as a massive flare across the entire European continent, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It proved to all the monarchs watching from Prussia, Austria, Russia, that the revolutionary coalition was deeply, deeply fractured.
It showed the kings that the middle-class liberals were actually more afraid of the working poor than they were of the old aristocracy.
Right. And if the coalition was broken, the kings knew they could just push back and shatter the revolution entirely.
And Marx and Engels, they saw this dynamic unfolding instantly, didn't they? I mean, they weren't just sitting in some university library writing abstract theoretical postmortems.
Not at all. They were operating a daily newspaper, the Neue Rheinische Zeitung, right in the thick of the fray in Cologne.
Right. And Volume 8 is just packed with the journalism they produced during this onslaught.
Yeah, you have articles in there like The Crisis in Berlin and Counter-Revolution in Berlin. These were direct, urgent responses to the counter-revolutionary coup d'etat happening in Prussia at that exact moment.
Where the king appointed an authoritarian ministry and essentially locked the Democratic Assembly out of their own building, right?
Literally locked the doors on them.
That's wild. And the role of their newspaper in this moment is so fascinating to me. They weren't just reporting the news. The Neue Rheinische Zeitung was like a tactical tool.
Absolutely. In a revolution, an independent press functions as an organizational hub.
Yeah, they were using their daily dispatches to mobilize resistance. They were attempting to stitch together a united front of workers and the remaining revolutionary Democrats.
They were trying to hold the line against this returning tide of absolutism. And they did that by exposing the maneuvers of the monarchists in real time.
It's like the second act of a movie trilogy, right? The rebels have breached the fortress, but suddenly the old empire's reinforcements arrive, and the heroes are forced into this desperate rearguard action.
That is exactly the vibe. And journalism for them in that environment was the inseparable unity of theory and practice. When you are writing amidst a failing revolution, the luxury of abstract utopian thinking just evaporates.
Right, you don't have time to philosophize about the perfect society when the army is marching down the street.
Exactly. The class struggle was materializing into colossal political clashes right outside their printing press. And this pressure cooker environment sharpened their analysis drastically.
They had to predict the after effects of military maneuvers, expose the traps being laid by the conservative elites, and try to act as a vanguard.
Warning the democratic movement of the immediate dangers ahead.
Which brings us right back to our heist movie Betrayal. Because the traps weren't solely being set by the old kings and emperors, the counterattack from the monarchies was profoundly aided by a betrayal from within the revolutionary camp itself.
A massive betrayal. And in Volume 8, this betrayal centers heavily on the actions of the Frankfurt Assembly.
Okay, so let's get into the Frankfurt Assembly. This is the ultimate case study in the collapse of that revolutionary coalition, right?
It really is. So during the initial Spring of Nations, this assembly was convened as the first freely elected parliament for all of Germany.
And who was in it?
It was dominated by the liberal bourgeoisie. So we're talking middle-class professionals, lawyers, intellectuals, industrial capitalists.
Right. And their stated historical task was to draft a constitution and unify all these fragmented feudal German states into a single democratic nation.
That was the goal.
Now, you would assume Marx and Engels would view this as a crucial stepping stone. I mean, their entire theory of historical progression posited that society had to move in stages, right?
Yeah, the orthodox stages theory.
Right, so feudalism had to be overthrown by the capitalist bourgeoisie to establish a democratic republic. And only after capitalism had fully developed, creating a massive working class, could the transition to socialism even be entertained.
So, following that logic, 1848 was supposed to be the bourgeoisie's big moment to lead the charge against the kings.
That was the foundational assumption of their early political strategy. The bourgeoisie was supposed to be the revolutionary class of the moment.
They were. But the events documented in Volume 8 shattered that assumption completely. Marx and Engels watched in real time as the Frankfurt Assembly just paralyzed itself.
Paralyzed how?
With endless, pedantic debates over constitutional wording. They were arguing over legal definitions while the Prussian and Austrian militaries literally marched back into the cities to reclaim power.
Wow, so why did they stall? Just incompetence?
No, they stalled because they were terrified.
Terrified of the kings?
No, terrified of the workers. When they looked at the June days in Paris, when they saw the working class fighting and dying on the barricades, demanding economic rights and an end to exploitation, the German bourgeoisie panicked.
Oh, I see. They realized that if they completely dismantled the old aristocratic order and the military apparatus of the kings, they would be left entirely alone.
Exactly, alone, face-to-face with an organized, militant working class.
And the fear of the proletariat vastly outweighed their desire for a fully democratic republic.
Without a doubt. Consequently, the bourgeoisie began to compromise with the old feudal orders. They sought this legal accommodation with the very kings they had supposedly just overthrown.
That is, I mean, that's just wild. By refusing to leverage the power of the popular masses to secure the revolution, they effectively connived with the counter-revolution.
They really hoped the monarchies would protect their property and status from the workers. Marx didn't mince words here. He branded this a literal act of treachery.
Wait, let me push back on this timeline a bit. So they actually expected the capitalists to be the initial revolutionaries? That sounds like a massive mid-game pivot in their philosophy.
It is a huge pivot. Real-world failure breeds new theory. If the very class that your theory dictates must lead the democratic revolution suddenly refuses to do so out of fear, well, the entire theoretical framework has to be rewritten.
The bourgeoisie was, as they wrote, step by step, losing its effectiveness.
Yes. And the breakdown of the orthodox stages theory forced a profound evolution for them. This specific disillusionment led directly to the formulation of a radically new concept.
Which was?
The hegemony of the working class.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, if the bourgeois democratic revolution, meaning the establishment of basic democratic rights, universal suffrage, the end of feudalism, if that was ever going to be completed, the working class could no longer act merely as the foot soldiers for the middle-class liberals.
They couldn't just be the muscle anymore.
Right. The workers had to take the steering wheel themselves. They had to become the hegemonic or leading force of the general democratic movement.
So they would have to drag the hesitant middle classes along with them or just push them aside entirely to finish the job.
Exactly. And this strategic pivot laid the groundwork for the concept of permanent revolution.
Permanent revolution, like it never stops.
Sort of. The logic dictates that if the working class leads the fight to achieve basic democratic rights, they can't simply hand power over to the terrified capitalists and say, okay, we'll wait a few decades for the next historical stage.
Right, because the capitalists would just sell them out again.
Exactly. So they must maintain their independent political organization and keep the revolutionary momentum going. The revolution must be continuous. It has to transition seamlessly from the democratic stage into the proletarian struggle, making the revolution permanent.
The sheer intellectual agility required to rewrite the software of your political philosophy while the military is literally marching down the street to shut down your printing press. It's staggering.
It really is. And, the counter-revolution wasn't just some political abstraction for Marx. It came for him personally.
Right, because Volume 8 documents a highly dramatic, very specific event, Marx's actual day in court.
Yes. In early 1849, Marx was brought before a bourgeois jury. He was facing charges related to his work with the Rhenish District Committee of Democrats.
Because the authorities were actively trying to crush any remaining democratic organizing.
Right, and they framed their prosecution heavily around the concept of a legal basis. The argument was very simple. The revolutionaries were violating the established laws of the Prussian state, and a society of laws must condemn those who break them to maintain order.
The classic defense of the status quo.
Completely.
It assumes that the laws are these immutable pillars holding up the roof of society. But Marx's defense is just completely audacious. I mean, he doesn't just argue that he's innocent to the specific infractions. He puts the entire philosophical concept of the law on trial.
He really does. He stands before this jury and argues that society is not founded on the law.
He turns the prosecution's entire worldview totally upside down.
He argues that the law must be founded on society. More specifically, he says the legal framework must express the common interests and needs that arise from the material mode of production prevailing at any given historical moment.
So the laws are merely the codified reflection of the underlying economic reality. It's like, okay, imagine arguing over the official rule book of a board game, but the house you are playing in is currently burning down and the floorboards are collapsing.
That's a great way to picture it.
And the prosecution is aggressively pointing at page 4 of the rule book, demanding everyone adhere to it. And Marx is saying, hey, the rule book is utterly obsolete because the foundation of the house, the economy, the social relations has fundamentally transformed. The game you wrote the rules for no longer exists.
That analogy perfectly highlights the absurdity of the prosecution's position. Marx explained to the jury that the existing legal system of the Prussian monarchy was designed entirely to protect the interests of feudal landlords and absolute kings.
Right.
That system was deeply, fundamentally incompatible with the new social and economic reality that had burst forth during the Revolution of 1848.
You can't just cram the new reality back into the old box.
No, you can't. Attempting to force a newly emerged dynamic society back into the restrictive legal straitjacket of a dying political system, it doesn't create order. It guarantees perpetual social crises.
Because the laws no longer match the reality of how people actually live, how they produce goods, and how they interact.
Exactly. And Marx took the offensive. He didn't just play defense. He boldly accused the Prussian crown of being the actual criminals in the room.
Oh, wow. In front of the jury.
In front of the jury. He argued that by staging a counter-revolutionary coup and by tearing up the democratic concessions that had been won by the people back in March 1848, the crown itself had violated legality.
The crown tore up the social contract first.
Yes. Therefore, the crown had absolutely no moral or legal standing to accuse the leaders of the democratic movement of illegal acts.
That courtroom speech is just a profound articulation of the materialist conception of history applied directly to jurisprudence, isn't it?
It really is. Marx is demonstrating that state power, the courts, the police, they are never neutral arbiters of abstract justice. They are the apparatus of the ruling class. They're designed to enforce the specific material interests of whoever holds economic power.
And when the economic power shifts, the laws must shift, or else the old laws simply become weapons of repression.
Exactly.
And that realization in the courtroom that local laws are dictated by broader economic and material power, it forced Marx and Engels to look far beyond the borders of Prussia, didn't it?
It had to. Because if the local authorities were just shadows cast by a larger system, well, where was the real power coming from?
Right. It was coming from the massive empires surrounding them. I mean, the revolution could not possibly survive if it remained confined within a single nation.
A newly democratic Germany would be instantly crushed if it was surrounded by absolute monarchies ready to invade.
So international solidarity transitioned from this, lofty moral ideal into an immediate strategic necessity.
Yes. And Volume 8 reveals their intense focus on the global chessboard. They were watching national liberation movements across the continent.
They were closely analyzing the uprisings in Hungary, Italy, Poland. Their newspaper published extensive articles like The Magyar Struggle and pieces addressing democratic pan-Slavism.
And here is where we encounter a concept from their writing that is notoriously difficult for a lot of modern readers to digest. The class criterion.
Okay, yes, let's talk about the class criterion.
Yeah.
Because when Marx and Engels looked at a nation struggling for independence, they didn't just offer blanket support based on, a universal right to self-determination, did they?
No, they didn't. They evaluated these movements with ruthless strategic pragmatism.
So what exactly did the class criterion mean in practice?
It meant evaluating every single national struggle through the overarching lens of the broader European Revolution. They asked two very specific questions.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, what class is leading this national movement? Is it driven by the revolutionary masses and progressive elements, or is it being led by reactionary aristocrats who just want to carve out their own fiefdoms?
Okay, that makes sense. And the second question?
Second, and most crucially, does this specific national movement materially weaken the massive reactionary empires, or does it inadvertently play into the hands of the counter-revolution?
Okay, I have to jump in and push back on this. Because applying a strategic matrix to a population's genuine desire for freedom feels incredibly cold.
It is cold.
Right. You were essentially saying they would evaluate an entire nation's struggle to throw off an oppressor. And if that struggle accidentally complicated the geopolitical chessboard for Marx's specific vision of a European revolution, they would label that oppressed nation as counter-revolutionary.
Yes, that is exactly what they did.
That approach seems guaranteed to alienate potential allies and just ignore massive human suffering.
The coldness of the calculation is undeniable, and it remains a highly controversial aspect of their political strategy to this day. But to grasp their logic, we have to look at the massive existential threat looming over Europe in 1848.
Which was Tsarist Russia.
Yes, Tsarist Russia. For Marx and Engels, the Russian Empire was the ultimate bulwark of feudal absolutism. It was this massive military reserve that the failing kings of Europe could always call upon to crush local democratic movements.
So if Tsarism survived, it would forever act as the gendarme of Europe, policing and destroying progress.
Exactly. So the collapse of the Russian Tsar and the weakening of the Austrian Habsburg Empire were the absolute non-negotiable preconditions for any successful democratic revolution in places like Germany or France.
Okay, I see. And in 1848, the ruling empires were brilliantly and brutally using national conflicts to divide and conquer the revolutionary wave.
They were. The Austrian Habsburgs, for instance, were highly skilled at raising armies from one oppressed nationality to crush the uprising of a different oppressed nationality within their own borders.
Wow.
Yeah. Marx and Engels observed that certain national movements, particularly among various Slavic groups in the Austrian Empire, were being actively co-opted by the Tsar and the Austrian Emperor.
The empires were just playing the oppressed populations against each other.
They weaponized nationalism.
Yeah.
So even if a specific group genuinely believed they were fighting for their own local autonomy, if their military actions were practically resulting in the strengthening of the Russian Tsar or the Austrian Emperor.
Marx and Engels deemed them counter-revolutionary.
Exactly. The intention of the local group didn't matter to them at all. Only the geopolitical outcome mattered.
So by that logic, if Poland is fighting for independence and a free, Poland acts as a buffer state that severely weakens Russia and Prussia, Marx and Engels are entirely in favor of it.
They passionately supported Polish liberation for exactly that reason. They saw a resurrected Poland as a necessary shield against Russian intervention. They similarly championed the Hungarian struggle against Austria and the Italian struggle against Austria.
Because those wars actively drained the resources of the absolutist empires.
Precisely.
But if another group's localized struggle for independence creates a distraction or a military advantage that helps the Tsar consolidate his armies, they're categorized as an enemy of the broader progress of humanity.
Yes. The local suffering is subordinated to the macro strategy.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply they viewed all phenomena of nationalism, jurisprudence, parliamentary debate as entirely subordinate to the underlying material reality.
The political chaos, the border wars, the courtroom dramas, these were all surface-level manifestations for them. The deeper reality, the engine driving the entire conflict, was the economic system.
Right. And Volume 8 is really pivotal because it documents the preparation of the material that would eventually become one of Marx's most foundational economic texts.
Wage labor and capital.
Yes. Wage labor and capital. So while dodging arrest warrants and managing a daily paper, Marx is laying down the specific mechanisms of his economic theory.
He was a busy guy.
Yeah, to say the least. Let's unpack the actual mechanics he was developing during this winter. We hear the terms wage labor and capital constantly, but what was the specific dynamic he was trying to expose to the workers?
He was attempting to demystify the invisible chains of the capitalist system.
Mhm.
So under feudalism, the domination was overt, right? The lord owned the land, and the serf was physically tied to it by force and law.
You couldn't leave without getting killed.
Right, but under capitalism, the worker appears free. They can choose to work for factory owner A or factory owner B.
They have freedom of contract.
Exactly. But Marx analyzed the actual mechanism of the wage itself. He argued that because the capitalist owns the means of production, the factories, the machines, the raw materials, the worker has absolutely nothing to sell but their own labor power just to survive.
The worker isn't forced by a sword. They are forced by the threat of starvation. They must sell their time to the capitalist.
And the crux of the mechanism is this. The capitalist pays the worker a wage that covers their basic survival and reproduction. Enough for food, shelter, maybe raising a kid to be the next generation of worker.
Just enough to keep them coming back the next day.
Right. But the worker produces far more value during their shift than that wage actually represents. The capitalist pockets that extra value, which Marx called surplus value.
And this creates an inherent, irreconcilable conflict.
It does. The expansion of capital inherently relies on the continuous extraction of this surplus from the wage laborer. It's not a malfunction of the system.
It is the system functioning perfectly.
Thanks.
And he didn't just stop at the factory floor, did he? He was looking at the trajectory of the entire economy. Volume 8 outlines his prediction regarding the inevitable destruction of the middle classes and the peasantry.
Yes, the proletarianization of the middle class.
So how does the expansion of this wage labor system actually destroy the middle class? I mean, people usually think capitalism builds the middle class.
Well, the mechanism there is the scale of production. As capitalism develops, technological advances and the drive for profit require increasingly massive scales of industry.
So bigger factories, more expensive machines.
Right. And the small business owner, the independent artisan making goods by hand, the small peasant farmer, they simply do not have the capital to buy the massive new machinery. They cannot produce goods as cheaply or as quickly as the massive industrial capitalists.
They just get priced out of existence.
They are completely outcompeted, they're driven into bankruptcy, and ultimately pushed down into the ranks of the working class. They are forced to sell their labor for a wage just like everyone else.
So the wealth heavily concentrates at the very top, while the vast majority of the population is proletarianized.
That was his analysis, yes.
And Marx also scaled this dynamic up to the international level, focusing on the commercial subjugation of Europe by England. Because at this time, England was the undisputed titan of the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, absolutely. England's industrial capacity was so wildly advanced compared to the rest of the continent that it acted as the despot of the world market.
Despot is the world market. Wow.
Marx analyzed how English capital could just flood European markets with cheaper, mass-produced goods, completely undercutting local industries in Germany or France.
So England was effectively turning other sovereign nations into economic subordinates.
Yes. Dictating the terms of global trade and forcing other nations to adapt to the needs of British capital.
Now, economic theories about surplus value and market subjugation can feel, very abstract.
Sure, very academic.
Right. But Volume 8 grounds these theories in a devastating real-world catastrophe that was unfolding precisely during these months, and that is the Irish Famine.
Yes.
This is where the theoretical hardware of economics results in mass death.
The Irish Famine is perhaps the most horrifying illustration of the mechanisms Marx and Engels were critiquing. Between 1845 and 1852, the potato crop in Ireland suffered catastrophic failures due to blight.
And the numbers are just staggering. Over 1 million people died of starvation and disease, and another 1 million were forced to flee the country.
But Marx and Engels fiercely rejected the narrative that this was merely a tragic natural disaster or an act of God.
Right, because the blight was natural, but the mass starvation was entirely man-made.
Completely man-made. Ireland was actually producing an abundance of food during the famine years. I mean, massive amounts of wheat, oats, barley, and beef.
But that food was being loaded onto ships under armed guard and exported to England.
Yes. And why? Because of the economic mechanism governing the land.
Break that down for us.
The mechanism was an enslaving lease system imposed on the Irish population by absentee English landlords. The vast majority of Irish farmers did not own the land they worked. They rented tiny plots under what was called the Connacher system.
And they had to grow cash crops to pay the rent.
Exactly. They had to grow the grains and the cattle to pay the exorbitant rents demanded by the landlords. They were only allowed to keep the cheapest, most high-yield crop, the potato, for their own survival.
The economic rules dictated that rent must be paid before the farmer could eat the very food they grew.
Right. So when the potato crop failed, the Irish peasants still had barns full of grain, but the legal and economic structure of capitalism dictated that the grain belonged to the landlord to be sold on the global market.
And if the peasants ate the grain, they violated the lease.
They violated the lease, and they would be violently evicted from their homes by the police and the military, cast out to freeze and starve in the ditches.
The legal system, which was designed to protect private property and the sanctity of rent contracts, served as the literal mechanism of mass starvation.
For Marx and Engels, the Irish famine was the ultimate, irrefutable proof that the capitalist economic system prioritized rent, profit, and the export market over human life on a scale of millions.
It demonstrated that the laws of economics the bourgeoisie championed were capable of producing apocalyptic outcomes as a byproduct of their normal, legally sanctioned functioning.
It strips away all the polite parliamentary debate, doesn't it?
It really does. When you see millions perish because a legal contract demands grain be exported for profit rather than eaten by the starving people who grew it, you understand the fierce urgency in Marx's writing.
Defeating the counter-revolution was not a debate society exercise for them. It was an attempt to dismantle a system that engineered atrocities.
So, bringing this all together, the events of late 1848 and early 1849 acted as a violent crucible.
They did. The texts in Volume 8 show two thinkers being pushed to the absolute limit by the brutal realities of history.
They were forced to discard their previous assumptions about the progressive nature of the middle class.
Right. They realized the working class would have to forge its own independent path, establishing its own hegemony to achieve true liberation.
They completely redefined the concept of law, stripping it of its sacred aura and exposing it as a temporary rulebook written by whoever wields economic dominance.
And they evaluated global conflicts with ruthless strategic focus. They subordinated localized struggles to the ultimate goal of toppling the absolute empires that held Europe in a stranglehold.
And beneath the journalism, the trials, and the geopolitics, they were meticulously mapping the deep economic hardware, the mechanisms of wage labor, the concentration of capital, the extraction of surplus value that generated all this surface-level political chaos.
History, as documented in these pages, isn't a static list of dates. It is the real-time, often agonizing adaptation of theory under the crushing pressure of material reality.
Returning to our original thought experiment.
Yeah.
The blueprint failed. The inside man betrayed the crew. The The vault was locked and the guards were rushing in.
But instead of surrendering,
Right. Instead of surrendering, Marx and Engels sat down amidst the wreckage, pulled out a pen, and began designing a completely new, far more potent theoretical explosive.
in those few freezing months, they forged sociological and political frameworks that would go on to literally reshape the 20th century.
It serves as a stark reminder of how deeply our philosophies and our understandings of the world are forged by the specific material crises we are forced to endure.
Absolutely.
So as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. And this builds directly on Marx's courtroom defense. He argued vehemently that our laws, our institutions, and our political systems are merely the shadows cast by our current material mode of production.
Right, the base dictates the superstructure.
Exactly. When the economy changes, the rules must change, or society fractures. And today, we are standing on the precipice of an entirely new economic paradigm.
We really are.
As we accelerate into an era of artificial intelligence and total automation, the very fundamental mechanisms of human labor, value creation, and production are transforming at light speed.
It's unprecedented.
So if Marx was right, if the foundation of the house dictates the rules of the game, what happens to our society in the coming decades?
That is the big question.
Are we currently attempting to govern tomorrow's automated post-labor world using yesterday's completely obsolete rulebook? And the economic foundation of our house is shifting that drastically beneath our feet. How long before the house itself begins to fall?